Chairman Krakow, would you please start? Now, we would like to start the 16th meeting of National Diet of Japan Fukushima Nuclear Accident Independent Investigation Committee. Hereby we commence the 16th meeting of the Commission. As been announced to you, we would like to start questions to the witness. Today, we have the member of House of Representatives and former Prime Minister, Mr. Naoto as witness. Thank you very much for joining us despite your busy schedule. As you know, Mr. Kang, as you are fully aware of, from 8th of June 2010 through September 11, he served as Prime Minister. So during the accident, Mr. Khan was in a position to handle the situation of the accident as Prime Minister. We would like to ask questions primarily centering around the days of the accident. Mr. Khan, would you like to start commenting by yourself? First of all, last year, the East Japan Great Earthquake and associated Fukushima nuclear accident. For those lost their lives and affected, and to the people of all over the world, I would like to extend my sincere condolence to all of you, particularly when it comes to nuclear power accident. That was the accident caused by the nuclear power station, which was promoted as a national policy. And the biggest responsibility, I believe, rests with the central government. I, as a person responsible for the government of Japan, would like to express the sincere words of apology to all of you in terms of not being able to prevent such accident. Then the question comes, what should be done not to repeat the nuclear power accident or not to cause nuclear power station to experience the accident? With that wish, I would like to welcome the honest questions, and I would like to try to answer this question as honestly as possible. For NAIIC member, I really hope that we will have a good meeting today. Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. First of all, I would like to raise questions through TV and the net. Information is circulating all over the world, and East Japan, great earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear power accident. All the statements uttered and all the responses Japan made were actually circulated through TV and media and net. And when the Prime Minister was speaking in the press conference, the statement once said was shared instantly by the people all over the world. Well, Mr. Khan, we are investigating the accident itself, and Mr. Khan went through a great difficult time. Being the Prime Minister, as a top of the central government, he spent his all of time to handle the situation. We really appreciate you taking your busy time to appear in this commission. As you know, this commission proceedings are actually interpreted in English, and that could be viewed by the net and also on our homepage. And we are fully aware that you have already been interviewed by the press overseas or various concerned institutions from overseas, because we have rather severe time constraint, I really hope that you will answer to our questions succinctly. And I would like to invite Mr. Sakurai to start the questions to you. Member Sakurai, nice to see you. I would like to ask a couple of questions before the accident took place. Allow me to call you Prime Minister Kan to remind you the days when you served as Prime Minister back at the time. Mr. Kan, with respect to the nuclear power accident, before you became Prime Minister, how was your understanding and knowledge about the nuclear power accident? Well, a 3 Mile Island accident, and after that there was a Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident, and I was quite interested in those incidents, particularly with respect to the Chernobyl nuclear power accident. Back at the time, the causes of that accident I investigated by myself, and also, when the accident took place in JCO, it was not nuclear reactor, and at the time I was a member of the opposition party. And I was curious and interested in why that criticality accident took place, and I didn't understand the cause at the time very much, so I talked with the people concerned to understand in my own way the causes of that accident, and I did investigate, and I understood the accident in my own way. And Mr. Kan, the risk related to the nuclear hazard and the possibility of occurrence of such hazard, before you became Prime Minister, what was your recognition with these points? Long before I became the member of the National Diet, I was involved in the civic movements, and in the people I conducted activities with, there were many people who were suspicious about the safety of the nuclear power plants. Even at the time I was about to become the member of the National Diet, the active fault presence at the Hamaoka nuclear power plant was pointed out by some of the people who actually conducted activities with me before I became the member of the National Diet. And those days, in Shamindan Party, the nuclear power plant was positioned as a stopgap, so to say, the energy source. So at a certain time, the political party I belonged at the time was advocating for the nuclear power generation as just a stopgap measure. So after that, I joined the DPJ from the day DPJ was established, and in policy formulation process, the safety of the nuclear power plant should be confirmed. With only that, then nuclear power plant could be operated, and that was, so to say, the idea I had when DPJ was established. Compared to the original idea I held when I was working in NGO, this was a little bit lukewarm position. But after I experienced March 11th, the fact that I shifted my position a little bit when DPJ was established, and the fact, in hindsight, the change in my idea was not the right one in hindsight, I found. And then, after you became Prime Minister, I would like to raise a series of questions. Well, there are quite a wide range of authorities and responsibilities given to the Prime Minister. One of them is when the countermeasure headquarters was established, Prime Minister has to serve as the top of the nuclear power accident countermeasure headquarters after the emergency declaration was made. After you became Prime Minister, prior to the accident, were you briefed about the responsibility and authority of Prime Minister in that context? As Prime Minister, what authorities or responsibility the Prime Minister would have? Well, those points had been discussed in general, and there was a certain idea already sitting in my mind, and without mentioning those were written in the constitutions and the law on the cabinet. When it comes to the specific responsibilities and authorities given to a Prime Minister when the nuclear power accident takes place, as the head of the countermeasure headquarters, after I became Prime Minister until the accident took place, I do not recall any situation I was briefed on those points. In 2010, after you became Prime Minister, there was a comprehensive disaster drills conducted. Did you participate in those drills? In National Diet? Actually, I was asked the same question, and I knew that there was such an opportunity to go through the drill. But in particular, with respect to the authority and responsibility as head of the countermeasure headquarters, I do not necessarily recall that I deepened my understanding on those through those drilling opportunity. In hindsight, you think that you should have been briefed about those responsibilities and authorities about the headquarter head, what the responsibilities and authority the Prime Minister would have as a head of a countermeasure headquarters. Yes, I regret it. I should have been explaining more deeply about it. Then I would like to ask questions after the Article 15 emergency notification was made. The Minister of METI, Mr. Kaeda, actually asked for your approval about the issuance of the emergency declaration. And it resulted after 19 o'clock, the emergency declaration was issued. And during which time, until that time, there was a political leaders meeting held. Before the party leader meeting, wasn't it possible to issue the declaration of emergency before you were involved in a party leader meeting at the time? From TEPCO to Mr. Kaeda, that was 1542. The notification came from TEPCO to the minister. Excuse me, that was the Article 10 notification. And for the Article 15, it was 1645 that TEPCO notified the minister. When a minister asked for my approval, it was the 17 o'clock, 42 minutes. That the minister asked for my approval. The party leader meeting was already set. And approximately for 5 minutes, I excused myself. To appear in the party leaders meeting. I came back so that Mr. Kaeda could explain the situation to me, which resulted in the issuance of the declaration. So it was actually 1903 that the declaration was made. But even before that, for earthquake and the tsunami, there was an emergency countermeasure headquarters was established, and for nuclear power accident in Prime Minister official residence, the countermeasure headquarters started activity. So the works had to be already started. Well, please, Commission, if you say that there was too late, please investigate about that. But when it comes to any disturbance because of the timing of the issuance, I do not believe that there is specific disturbance of the timing of the declaration. Mr. Kai, I'm not asking whether there is any disturbance because of the timing of declaration or not. in the official residence, I think it was you, Mr. Khan, some people say, who was most knowledgeable about the nuclear power plant. And when the Minister of Media came to you for approval of the declaration based upon Article 15, you were the most knowledgeable person. Significance of that Article 5 notification, I'm asking why it took a long time for you to approve the declaration. Honestly speaking, there was not the case that I postponed the decision by some reason, so I repressed the issuance of the declaration as such. It was not the case. The report was made at 17:42 to me for my approval of declaration. And on the other side, we have the party leaders of the opposition waiting, and I committed to the participation to the leaders' meeting. So I excused myself for 5 minutes to attend the meeting. I came back. It was a delay of 1 hour 21 minutes. So if it could be much earlier, that could have been better. But it was not really an intentional delay of the approval for any reason.
Well, with regard to the instructions given for evacuation, 3 kilometers was the area of evacuation that was recommended by the government. Based upon what did you decide on 3 kilometers? First, regarding evacuation, this might be raised later on, but usually the off-site center would look at the situation locally and come up with their own policy, and that would come to the headquarters, and the head of the headquarters would look into that and make a decision. Regrettably, the off-site center was not functioning at that time. NISA, as well as the NSC head and the TEPCO people assembled in order that we may grasp the situation. As far as the evacuation was concerned, it was Mr. Watanabe who was the head of the NSC. Mr. Matarame. And we heard his opinions and made our decisions based on that. 21 hours and 23 minutes, there would be a decision made under Article 15 that there would be an evacuation of 3 kilometers in radius because of F1. We did not know what sort of severe situation we were still facing, so we decided that 3 kilometers would be the distance at that point for preventative measures. I'd like to ask about the evacuation zone. And then next, there was a decision made to make it 10 kilometers, and it was 5:44 p.m. that this was decided. Who made the judgment? Whose decision was it? On the 12th of March of 5:44, from F1, a radius of 10 kilometers would be the evacuation area. And that is because Unit 1 had pressure increasing within it, and that was the report that we had received from the TEPCO people. And NISA and NSC were asked their opinions. And as far as the pressure increase was concerned, in the worst case scenario, this would have include the danger of damaging the containment vessel. So we thought about that possibility and decided upon 10 kilometers. As far as the decision regarding 10 kilometers, does it have any relationship with the venting activities? Regarding the venting, on the 11th. From that stage, the discussions began in earnest on the 12th regarding that. The METI minister provided his instructions regarding that. 5:44 a.m. in the morning on the 12th, there was a venting instructions, but this was after the venting instructions were given. So the concerned people involved in this matter, this was the material that was utilized to make their judgment one of the many things taken into account. As I had mentioned earlier, I heard the experts' opinions, and I also looked at the international experiences, and we made our decisions based upon that. And then the instructions given regarding 20 kilometers, what sort of opinions were those decisions based upon? Basically speaking, it's the same. It was the 12th of March, 1800 hours and 25 minutes. Already, there was a hydrogen explosion that began at 1500 hours and 36 minutes. Moreover, units 2 and 3, there was the possibility that such a danger could arise in those units as well. Having heard the experts' opinions, we decided it would be 20 kilometers. And at that point in time, was there consideration made about 30 kilometers? I'm sure there were various discussions that were held. That's my awareness. At the same time, to further expand the evacuation area, swift evacuation needs to take place, and preparations need to be made to make that possible. And I do believe that such preparations were already underway. Unit 1 had a hydrogen explosion. It was after that. If units 2 and 3 possibly might have that kind of explosion take place in those units, and radioactive substances leaked out in a substantial way outside, it would be, depending upon the situation, more safe to shelter in place for a certain period of time. Finally, we heard our experts' opinions, and ultimately, 20 kilometers would be the distance, and after that, it became 30 kilometers for sheltering in place. Next, Prime Minister, you went to Fukushima Daiichi to inspect the situation. You also went to the other areas that were not affected by the tsunami as well. This doesn't need to be explained, but you decided to go to Fukushima Daiichi, and how did you decide this? The objective for the inspection that I was to make, as I had stated, I wanted to understand the earthquake and tsunami damages myself. The Hanshi Awaji earthquake had happened in the past, and at that time I was not a member of the cabinet then. However, there were discussions as to when the cabinet members ought to go or not go. I did watch this on TV at that time, the Hanshi Awaji earthquake time. However, to see the situation for myself with my own eyes, even if it were from above ground, this would be very important, I felt. On the other hand, as far as the nuclear power station is concerned, after the 12th, NISA and NSC and TEPCO technical fellow also gave us briefings, and having heard what they had to say, for example, on the first site, what sort of situation would the reactor be in, and what sort of situation could unfold, and what sort of countermeasures ought to be provided for. This discussion did not take place, regrettably. What TEPCO had told us was that we needed to provide the vehicles necessary to provide the power generation. And after that, there was a discussion regarding venting activities. The basic explanations that I had looked forward to receiving, I was not able to receive. As far as the venting activities were concerned, the METI minister, TEPCO, said they wanted to do the venting activities, and he said that that would be fine. But it took many hours before this happened in actuality. So why was it not happening? I asked. And the answer was, we do not know. We do not know really perplexed me. Was there a technical reason or other reasons? If they knew what those reasons might be and they could tell that to us, then that's understandable. However, as far as the Fukushima F1, the first site, was concerned, by speaking to the person responsible at that first site, we felt it would be possible to grasp the situation by going to the Fukushima Daiichi site, and that's how the decision to go was made. At Fukushima Daiichi, you met with the head of the nuclear power station, Mr. Yoshida. You explained the objective as to why you made that visit. What sort of results were you able to achieve? I went to the seismic absorbing facilities and heard from Mr. Yoshida, as well as the vice president. And several of our people also participated in that meeting. And we saw the blueprints and were given explanations regarding the situation, looking at those drawings. And venting activities were something that we had already approved. If the venting doesn't take place, then the containment vessels would be destroyed because the pressure would continue to build up. So please do this venting activity as soon as possible. And they said, we understand. We will make certain that people put their lives on the line to make this happen. And I had the impression that Mr. Yoshida would in fact take it upon himself to make this happen. I was there in that facility for about 40 minutes, and then we left thereafter. There were various judgments that were made thereafter, especially regarding TEPCO's withdrawal issue and the decisions that needed to be made regarding that. It's not that I spoke about this time and again with the people on site. However, the thinking of the people on site and their viewpoints and learning about those was something that was a very significant thing for me. And I was able to put names to faces, and this was a very good thing, I felt. I'd like to ask more questions about the withdrawal of the employees later on. Now I'd like to ask about this sort of situation when it happens under the laws that exist. You can give the authority to make decisions to the local areas. However, it seems as if this was not realized at that time. Did you understand that they were not given the authority to make the decisions and take the actions necessary on site? At that time, from NISA, there was no explanation regarding that. So, as far as the law and what it says, that's something I looked into in detail later on. There was no explanation at that point in time. And the offsite center itself, I think the deputy prime minister arrived on the 12th at a certain hour. So I heard that the persons concerned with this matter were not able to all assemble. So it was not a situation where they could function properly. And was this why NISA did not relay this, or were there other reasons as to why this was not relayed? At any rate, I did not receive a clear explanation. At the second meeting of the disaster countermeasures headquarters, at that second meeting, you were not there at that time, Prime Minister Khan. There was a proposal in the distributed materials about providing them the authority locally to make their decisions and to take action. You were not aware of this. I was not.
Okay. I briefly referred to venting, so I would like to shift the topic to the injection of the seawater. The issue of seawater injection, how that idea of injecting seawater came to you? With respect to the seawater injection, to myself as well, there was an issue subject to a lot of criticisms, so I would like to streamline the situations in answering your question. First of all, seawater injection. When the fresh water is out for cooling, it will require seawater injections. On that particular point, with me and experts and Mr. Kaeda, we had consulted opinion on the desirability of the seawater injection. And around 18 o'clock on the 12th of March, for 20 minutes or so, I myself, Mr. Kaeda, head of the NISA, NAIIC, people in charge, and people from TEPCO, talked together about this. At the time, Mr. Takekuro Ferro from TEPCO, in charge of technology, said it'll take 1.5 to 2 hours to prepare for the injecting seawater. So using that time, not only the seawater injection, but also we thought other points could be discussed during that time. On that day, around 15 o'clock, Unit 1 exploded, experienced hydrogen explosion. I also had asked about the possibility of the hydrogen explosion before the event, and the answer given to the question was that there will be nitrogen, so there will be no explosion. But actually, a hydrogen explosion had happened. So I thought I rather ask several points we should talk together on top of seawater injection itself. One point was the effect by the seawater, and about the recriticality. It was not really that the shift from the freshwater to the seawater caused recriticality. It was not the case. I'm not an expert, so I wouldn't go into details. The possibility of the recriticality is that for a drop of the film rods, and after a meltdown took place, the fuels might become aggravated or became lump. Then the recriticality might happen. That was answer, and the Chair Watanabe said that the possibility is not now. So I thought that because we have time, we thought that we should consider all those points. By injection boric acid, that could suppress the possibility of the criticality emission. The people concerned knew about it, so I requested them to consider that possibility as well. Should I continue? In the national diet, I think you received the several questions on this particular point. That might be different interpretations, but when the question was raised with respect to the seawater injection, and the record said you said that we needed the discussions on criticality, and we requested them to consider. So how do you relate what you said to what you actually answered in the national diet, as I read? Exactly the same thing. Was there any contradiction, do you think? What I said was, for example, the seawater injection, some press said had nothing to do with the criticality. It's wrong. But what I said was that there is no increasing possibility of criticality by shifting from the freshwater to seawater. So what the press said was not correct. With respect to the criticality, later we added the boric acid to the seawater, and in the power plant, the boric acid was stored. So what I said was to instruct the to conduct the conservation of the including boric acid. So there's no contradiction of what I said vis-a-vis what I answered in the national diet. Actually, from TEPCO headquarters, there was an instruction for TEPCO head office to the plan to stop the seawater injection if they started injecting. But Mr. Yoshida continued injecting the seawater. At least TEPCO actually took your words very seriously to instruct the power plant to suspend the seawater. How do you view this attitudes of TEPCO head office? The chairman of TEPCO made a statement in this commission. I know what he said, but the chairman of TEPCO said on this particular point, he didn't really sound like he was technically briefed on this point. Let me clarify the factual relationship. Sorry to name the person. Mr. Takekuro Fellow, who is the expert in the nuclear power plant, he said that it would take 1.5 and 2 hours to prepare seawater injection. We thought that we asked him to report. I think around 1940, they came to me and the seawater injection was really ready. And that was the understanding I had at the time. And later, as well as things revealed, after 20 minutes meeting was over, Mr. Takekuro Fellow called Mr. Yoshida directly. Already, by that time, seawater had been already injected. That was news Mr. Takekuro gained from Mr. Yoshida. And that news didn't come to me. There were two major problems. The first problem is if the seawater had been already injected, they could continue the operations. If there's any risk of the criticality, they could add the boric acid. Actually, that's what they did. But Mr. Takekuro actually made a judgment, and he said Mr. Yoshida to suspend the seawater. There is a phrase that by the intentions of the Prime Minister's office. When you say that, there could be a lot of things, the mixture of opinions at the Prime Minister's office. One is opinions of typical people, and opinion of myself, and opinion of the other government people. So I would like to say clearly, squarely to media, the TEPCO's people in Prime Minister's office is not did not represent Prime Minister's office of opinion. Mr. Takekuro, Mr. Yoshida is a expert and a professional in a nuclear accident. Mr. Takekuro fellow knew that by shifting from pure water to seawater doesn't add to the risk of recriticality. I didn't understand why that an expert in this area instructed Mr. Yoshida to suspend the seawater injection. I heard later Mr. Yoshida thought that was my intention to suspend the seawater injection, and he asked the head office of TEPCO, Mr. Yoshida, asked the head office of TEPCO. TEPCO tried to convince him to suspend the seawater, and Mr. Yoshida, he thought that he should act like an actor, and he just instructed the people at the site to continue seawater injection. And TEPCO thought that the injection was suspended temporarily. But I learned about this at much later time in the budget committee or even among the politicians. It sounded like I stopped the injection of water and that caused the meltdown of the core. Let me repeat. The people coming from Toden working at the Prime Minister's official residence, based upon their judgment, said something, and that opinion did not represent the Prime Minister's official residence. Quite contrary, their opinion was completely different from opinion of myself, or the opinion of the Prime Minister's official residence. The TEPCO said that TEPCO didn't tell you the seawater injection started. But from TEPCO, they said that it was communicated to NISA, but from NISA it didn't go to Prime Minister. How do you view this fact? The seawater injection was notified to NISA, but you didn't receive that news from TEPCO. Well, on this particular point, the Minister Meti was responsible for NISA. For example, Mr. Takeguro fellow could have said that there was already injection started to Mr. Kaeda, and then Mr. Kaeda would have told me about that. Once Mr. Takekuro had known that seawater injection started, then I was there, so he should have told me directly the seawater already was ejected. And how the communication was made to NISA, at least at the time, I didn't know. I dare say this. Even after that, for some time, I think it was 1903 or 1907 that TEPCO did not really accept the fact that seawater started to be injected. And they came to me at 1940 or so, and around 20 o'clock, they, for the first time, told me that the seawater was injected. So although the TEPCO might have said that they communicated the seawater injection, but it was quite contradictory to what they say at the later time. And if this, they communicated, they should have communicated to me or to the Minister Meti, because it was immediately after I finished talking with Mr. Takekuro. Mr. Kang, the recriticality is not really directly related to the seawater. No, I'm not saying seawater, changing from pure water to seawater, what I meant. Well, people around you at the time actually prepare a lot of materials and gave a lot of consideration to explain to you there is no direct relationship between seawater and recriticality. How do you view that fact? No, I didn't know about that. Well, I studied about recriticality. There was an accident of recriticality at GCO, so including that incident, and also I heard from NISA and NSC. In what situations we should assume the risk? On this point, I heard the explanation from experts. For example, for some reasons, the control rod fell and the fuel reached the criticality. After fuel meltdown, the meltdown fuel could accumulate like a mountain shape, and depending upon shape of the residual fuel piled up, that could lead to the criticality. But I was not at least briefed that there was an increasing risk of the criticality by changing water from pure to seawater. To prevent that, we could add boric acid to suppress the movement of the neutron that I heard. So I didn't know about the thing you asked about.
Thank you. I'd like to ask about TEPCO's withdrawal issue. To the Prime Minister, what sort of request did TEPCO make, and from whom did you receive a report about this? On the 15th, it was 3 a.m. or so. For a week after the 11th, when the accident had taken place, I was in the Prime Minister's residence even at night. And there was a room sometimes where I would rest for a bit. However, the METI minister wanted to consult with me. I had heard from my aide, so I was woken up. And Minister Kaeda, METI minister, came and said that TEPCO wanted to withdraw. What shall we do about this? And that was how I had heard about this withdrawal matter. And what did you think about this, and how did you receive this? Up until then, as far as nuclear accidents are concerned, and this one in particular, to what extent will it get more severe? To what extent can it be stopped? I was always thinking about this constantly. At the very least, in terms of Chernobyl, it was one reactor, and 3 Mile Island, it was only one reactor. But at Fukushima Daiichi, there were 6 units, and there were 7 spent fuel pools. And in the second site, there are 4 reactors and 4 pools within 20 kilometers. And if something should happen to these, and if there is a meltdown, and if there is damage to the reactor or to the pool, this would not just be a few times more than the damage in Chernobyl, but dozens of times, hundreds of times in terms of the damage that would ensue. And this would leak out into the atmosphere and into the water, into the soil. And I had thought about that constantly. And I thought, personally, that this is like fighting with an enemy that one cannot see. At any rate, we needed to do our utmost to contain this. And I put my life on the line to continue this fight. From the METI minister, when I had heard about this, I heard about withdrawal, the possibility of this, and I said, how could that be? That's what I first thought, that they could say this. You went to the Fukushima nuclear power station, and having met Mr. Yoshida, your trust in him was further strengthened. He seems a very responsible man. How did you feel about having heard about this withdrawal request in light of what you thought about Mr. Yoshida? Mr. Yoshida and I had a direct conversation over the telephone And I believe we spoke twice over the telephone. The first time on the 14th, it was during the evening. Mr. Hosono, who was special assistant at that time, Mr. Yoshida phoned twice, I had heard from Mr. Hosono. And the first time we were told it's a very severe situation. And the second call had to do with the injection of water being difficult. But maybe the injection of water could be done now. And the second time, Mr. Hosono said, Mr. Yoshida is saying this, so please take this phone call. And I took the phone call. And Mr. Yoshida said, we can still do some things. And another thing that I had the aide do and look into had to do with, I don't remember the details, but generally speaking, it had to do with the situation on site. And I had asked about that and for my aide to look into that. Aside from that, I did not speak directly by telephone. Also, there is a mention from Mr. Nomura that I had listened in on a cell phone conversation. I looked into this, and I don't recall having done that. And the aide who was there then, and the counselor who was there then, and the assistant who was there then, I confirmed with them that they do not recall that either. And in my cell phone records as well, there is no record of that. Mr. Shimizu, the president, was called. And Mr. Shimizu, regarding this withdrawal possibility, what sort of response was he giving? To Mr. Shimizu, I had said that there will be no withdrawal. And Mr. Shimizu had said, yes, I understand. That's how he replied when I said that. And when you heard his reply, what did you think as Prime Minister at that time? As far as that reply was concerned, Chairman Katsumata and others were saying that President Shimizu is saying that there will be no withdrawal. I said there will be no withdrawal, and he said, yes, I understand. So I've never heard from him that there will be a withdrawal. I said this at the Diet as well. I said there will be no withdrawal. It was accepted when I said this. And I said this at the Diet as well. From President Shimizu saying there would be no withdrawal. It seems the story is changing, but it was myself that said this, not Mr. Shimizu. And what I had said, Mr. Shimizu said in response to that, I understand. Having heard that, I felt relieved, but I thought that was not enough. So therefore, from my side, I said there ought to be an integrated response headquarters set up. And we wanted that set up at TEPCO. And we wanted to have Mr. Hosono be there constantly, as well as Minister Kaeda. And I will be the head of that headquarters. And Minister Kaeda and Mr. Katsumata was there as well. And Mr. Hosono was the Secretary General of that. And I was told, understood. Now we would like to have our first meeting, I said, of that integrated headquarters. So we'd like to have TEPCO prepare for that. How much time will it take? I was told 2 hours or so. So I said, please make it sooner. And it was about 1 hour later that we were able to hold that meeting at TEPCO of that integrated response headquarters. This will be my last question right now. at this juncture. I believe that you were not able to receive various types of information. In the basement, there was the Emergency Countermeasures Center, Emergency Response Center, ERC, which was set up. Why was it that after the accident had taken place, for a while, this is in the operations center, and the information was being collected, and all kinds of instructions could be given there? Why was that not utilized as the headquarters by yourself? As far as the earthquake and the tsunami were concerned, these were large-scale disasters that had taken place. And then we also had the nuclear power station accident, which was also very large-scale. And these have, in reality, occurred. As far as the ERC in the basement was concerned, I went back to the Prime Minister's office, and I went there, and the Emergency Response Center was set up. And at the same time, we needed to deal with these two huge disasters. And another thing had to do with the team that needed to deal with this emergency. And the crisis management person in charge was the head of that. The Prime Minister does not need to be there at all times. If there is a necessity, I'm there in the Prime Minister's office and residence, so I would receive notification and I could go as necessary. On top of that, as far as the nuclear power station accident was concerned, for the matters other than the reactor, the off-site center in the local area needed to function, but they were not functioning. And as far as the reactor was concerned, this is something the electric power company needed to deal with. If it was a small-scale accident, it might have been possible, but whether it be venting, as an example, whether this would be done or not, it's a reactor-related issue, and the effects will be felt by the people of the area. And for that decision to be made solely by the electric power company, that was not possible. So therefore, there was a special measures law regarding nuclear power station accidents, and tens of thousands of people would be negatively affected, but we were not able to fully respond. Whether I was there in the basement in the ERC or not, it's not that I was even expected to be there in the basement at the ERC, and under this special measures law, the off-site center, the earthquake and the nuclear power station accident would occur separately, and the earthquake occurring and then the deputy minister not being able to reach where he needed to reach. This was not assumed. So we did all kinds of things that needed to be done under the difficult circumstances. It was a situation where we had to do everything that we could under the circumstances, if you would kindly understand that. Thank you very much. I am Nomura, a member also of this commission. I'd like to continue with my questions, if I may. At the beginning, Prime Minister Kan, you had said regarding this accident that had taken place, you had apologized, and this accident could not have been stopped. But you feel great regret that it could not have been stopped. I believe you had apologized for this at the beginning. You said it could not be stopped. What did you mean? Did you think that the laws and regulations were inadequate that had existed, or did you think it was inadequate what the ministries and the Prime Minister's office was able to do or not do? And were you apologizing because of those things? Also, in the evacuees as well as the scientists and experts, after Unit 1's explosion, Unit 3 or Unit 4 or even Unit 2, there have been sounds of explosions, and this could have been somehow technically stopped. Are you apologizing for not having been able to do that? And if the evacuation instructions could have been given in a more appropriate manner, then they would not have been so exposed to radioactive substances. Do you feel that there was a problem with the evacuation announcement that was made, and were you apologizing for that? I just wanted to confirm those points with you, please.
First of all, in Japan, the peaceful use of atomic energy for more than 40 years was promoted by the groups of politicians and the other peoples as well. And at present time, well, until I would like to go through the situation up to March 11th, and on safety, on atomic energy, not enough preparations. And sometimes there were indications to point to such not enough preparations that the explanation were not really fully taken into consideration. Actually, the 35-meter height of the location was considered, but in order to pump up the seawater, the seawall was cut at the height of 10 meter from 35 meter. I look at the history book of the TEPCO, Fukushima NAIIC, and the book says it was action of the good foresight. But at the time of the findings available there, major earthquakes sway the area every several decades. So the fact that the seawall was cut from 35 to 10 meter actually manifested that not enough preparedness was secured for tsunami at the Fukushima Daiichi. So this was a fundamental issue, and also in nuclear power village as such, there were criticism pointing to the possible risk of the area, and those criticism was not really fully into consideration. There was another point of reflection, and adequate response was not really made. So that was the response I referred to as the government. If it's a fault of the TEPCO, I think there's no reason you have to apologize. But when you did apologize, you really accepted the fault of the national government. Well, the government actually gave approval to the TEPCO's power plant, and everybody would not really deny the fact that the central government promoted the nuclear power plant. So it was a government policy plus the utilities efforts. So at that juncture, I accepted that was partly at least the central government's responsibility. Well, there was also opinion saying that a series of hydrogen explosion could have been prevented, and among the affected people, there was a voice that sometimes the evacuees evacuated in the wrong direction. As a result, they were contaminated much more than they anticipated. Or some voices said that if the instruction of evacuation was done more properly, then the evacuees could have had more belongings to prepare for the long-term evacuation. How do you respond to these criticisms? First of all, I actually appear as witness in the hearings of the investigation commission by the government as well as in private sector. I said this. When it comes to the situation prior to March 11 and the period from March 11 up to present time, and thirdly, from present to the future, I think I'm expecting the thorough investigation be done for each period. And you stated several points in your question. For example, you stated that after the explosions of Unit 1, why we couldn't really stop the explosions of the other units. That's what you said in your question. I read various materials and I heard various opinions. I have a lot of feelings in my mind, but this particular question like this should be subject to the thorough investigation by your commission. But at this moment, what I can say is that in terms of the evacuation instruction, I think we did all that we could to the best. And I heard what Mr. Idana mentioned in this hearing, but the people understood that instruction of evacuation was just for the short term, but it wound up in a long-term evacuation. And also, there is a long duration of the people have to stay in shelter. So if those were how people understood, I would like to apologize for that. The separate topic, as a major topic, as you said, in the countermeasures to the accident, there are some movements which were not really guided in the law or the countermeasure law because the incident, which was there are situations which was not assumed in the countermeasures. So I think you would say is that all those actions were reasonable because those situations were not assumed. And a safety advisory group was created with Mr. Madabe as chair. I think that was within the provision of the law, and we are fully aware that you took those committees' advices. And on top of that, using your cell phone, you try to get the inputs from the experts from outside. And it was pointed out here and there about this fact. But was there such a fact, actually? As Prime Minister, the basic is as follows. Basically, be they advices or suggestions, the NISA was the secretariat, so the NISA is an access. And the highly independent NISA, from Mr. Watanabe, we got advices, and also from the utility, TEPCO. They sent to us the fellow in charge of technology. So those three are the primary bodies for technical advices and suggestions. And each institution or people work like that. But other than that, I myself, for my reference, ask several persons to forward their opinions, or we ask somebody to become the deputy cabinet secretary advisor to the cabinet for myself. And the chief and the piece of information you gather was shared with the chief cabinet secretary and others. Among the explanations I heard from those people, I actually told to the people at NISA or at the chair of the NSC occasion to the people of TEPCO that there was such and such opinion. Would it be necessary to consider these opinions? I told them. Usually, the minister and chief cabinet secretaries were present together with me when we heard the explanation from those people. So, for any explanation I got, other than all those three bodies, and so far I never make a decision on my own based upon the information I got from the people outside those three organizations. So I gather that the opinions I gather personally from them were actually considered together with the government opinions. What specifically did you consult with? There are many things that I asked for their opinions. For example, whether the core meltdown was happening or not. I asked for several persons to give their opinions. Some people actually said at the early stages, definitely, the core meltdown started. And also, another issue is recriticality. Actually, there was a nuclear power expert explaining to me that in what situations the possibility of recriticality exists or not. And on top of that, including the person who became the special advisor to the cabinet, actually helped us in analyzing colossal documents submitted by TEPCO. By saying that among the indication from document, this indication could contain this problem as such. The kind of expert opinions was forwarded. And also there is another one is the outro of the contamination to the seawall. And one of the advice was the considerations of the digging the ground, the seabed rock, 30 meter in depth, although it might cost several hundred billions of yen. And other is a reinforcement of the structure such. Actually, after having heard their opinions, I asked my people to consult with the related organization to consider those inputs. Well, in hindsight, were there any ideas you obtained from your personal experts that you didn't take, but the situation would have been different if you had taken their proposal? Well, there are so many inputs I got from those my experts. Some of them were just ad hoc ideas, and I would say not all of them were implemented. And even if there were a meaningful proposal, the proposal was not implemented. Would you be more specific, please? Well, you referred to the person who became the special advisor to the cabinet later. But at early stage, you invited Mr. Hibino to Prime Minister's official residence. When did you invite him to the Prime Minister's official residence? I think it was around the 20th that I asked him to become the special advisor to the cabinet. But even before that, at an earlier stage, I told him to come to the office to get his opinions. I think it was exactly on the 20th there was official instruction that became special advisor to the cabinet. But even before that, you got various inputs from him. What was the legal status before 20th of the Mr. Hibino? Before he became special advisor to the cabinet, I not only Mr. Hibino, but I asked inputs from various people, including people who did not become special advisor to the cabinet. Therefore, I personally asked the person's opinion from the people in public. So that's the kind of relation we had with them. What's the expert area of what area is Mr. Hibino expert area? At university, telecommunication, physics, and electronics were the area of expertise, and he is serving as a vice president of the university. Computer and IT were his area, but you receive his input as an expert in nuclear power accident or nuclear power generation. Not necessarily so. Well, for example, experts in nuclear power generation include the researchers in the Tohoku University, Tokyo University, and Kyoto University. at the university I graduated from, although I personally knew exact experts, but I asked Mr. Hibino to tell me what person should I consult with. And I also asked the president of the university to recommend some people. And some of them, a person he recommended became the special advisor to the cabinet. And we thought that we should support those special advisors. And they gave us various advices, and I owe them a lot. In the report by the Commission in private sector, the then official, the chief of the cabinet secretary says that Edano was not in full support of the people you personally asked for their opinions. And there were some other people saying that there was a confusion of information by inviting opinions privately from the people from outside. How do you think? Even before March the 11th, there were people who asked to become a special advisor to the cabinet. But what I said before, after March 11th, for example, Mr. Hibino, on a broad term, it gave us advice on the accent. But after March 11th, I do not recall any person whose expertise are not in a nuclear accent that I asked for his or their opinion. Prime Minister, you said previously that you visited Fukushima Daiichi, and you saw the people fighting to arrest the situation, not the accent, to spread over. And you said that you trusted them. The people working at the site having a telephone call by Mr. Hibino were quite surprised that Mr. Hibino asked quite primitive questions to them, and that actually disturbed their work. So did you just think that that was a problem, that Mr. Hibino asked a primitive question to disturb their work at the people at the site? Well, I think that's a rather abstract question that you raise. So I don't know. Well, I was puzzled how to answer. Maybe it will be easier if you raise the question more specifically. Well, at this particular accident, there's a explanation given by the expert on the structure of the reactor, and some people are expert in the effect by the radioactivity, and some other people in different areas. So in respective areas of expertise, I asked the different people to give me the inputs and advices on respective areas of expertise. So I mean that your question is rather broad, so I can't really give you a specific answer. Previously, I said that I think the cell phone number was noted. You said that, as I understood, for Fukushima Daiichi, actually, communication to Fukushima was through the TEPCO head office, and the call was made to the fixed phone of the Fukushima Daiichi. So I would like to correct that. And also, there was a frequent call to the site. Who actually made a frequent call to the site? As I said earlier, with respect to Mr. Yoshida, after March 11th, up until the present time, there were 2 times that I called Mr. Yoshida. As I said earlier, And the first time was I talked to him when the call was made to Mr. Hosono. The second time was that through my secretary, I talked to Mr. Yoshida to question about the situations. And for the other calls, who did what, I didn't know.
Well, normally from the Prime Minister's office, there would be confirmation done by telephone, but this is not in the law, written in the law. So therefore, this setup where you would have the instructions given to the necessary people from the Prime Minister's office was not really functioning properly. Well, when you say originally it was set up to be that way or not be that way, there's various instances. There is the off-site center, first of all, for the off-site, and for on-site, there's the Reactor Regulatory Act that exists. Basically, it's the operator's responsibility. Therefore, as far as TEPCO's reactors, nuclear power stations are concerned, they understand this best. So it would be the operators themselves. From the operators, the necessary information through the people who are there at the Prime Minister's office or via NISA. This needs to be swiftly and appropriately relayed to us so that we can make our decisions and judgments. And if this were relayed to us in an appropriate manner, at the very minimum, we could say that sort of necessity would have been close to nil. However, in the initial stages, as far as the reactor and what was going on there was concerned, to NISA, there really weren't people who could explain the situation until about the third day or so. And the TEPCO people who were there, I wonder if maybe TEPCO was doing a very detailed and appropriate follow-up or not. I don't think that was the case. So most things they did not understand and were not able to explain. So that's not the way that it ought to have functioned, I do believe. But it was a crisis situation, and there were all kinds of discussions going on. So whatever could be done would have needed to be done. And please understand that whatever needed to be done was done. We had hearings with the people who were on site. It seems as if the plane was about to crash, and the pilots were trying to make certain that the plane would not crash. And normally, under such circumstances, a phone call would not come in. That's how they put it. Vis-a-vis TEPCO headquarters, someone could have gone as a liaison, and the integrated headquarters could have been set up at an earlier stage. That might have been the way to go about it. And if there was a phone call to be made to the cockpit, it needed to be kept at the very minimum, and that needed to be assured that that was the case. Yeah, exactly as I say, on the 15th. There was the integrated headquarters that was set up, and the integrated headquarters collected the information, and all the concerned parties were there on a 24-hour basis, and they consulted with one another. And if it was necessary, there would be a confirmation made by Mr. Hosono at that time. That was the situation. But looking back on it, we ought to have had such an arrangement at an earlier stage. As you are well aware, this was not something that was stipulated in the nuclear accident countermeasures law, but this needs to be revised. And as far as the cockpit telephone calls are concerned, I do understand the point you're making. As I had mentioned earlier, I don't know how many people, how many times they made their phone calls, through what means. If it's via TEPCO, we would like to return your call later on. Perhaps they could have said that. But at any rate, this also needs to be further investigated, and the response needs to be made as a new arrangement to appropriately respond to the situation. Via TEPCO, this is something that goes directly to the site, these phone calls. So the frequent phone calls that came in, if the integrated headquarters could have been set up earlier, then the direct instructions need not have been made, and the questions need not have been asked when they were. I was just answering your question. I do agree with what you have to say. As far as NISA is concerned, at the press conference when the head of NISA was resigning, he was saying that they ought to have gone to TEPCO headquarters right away. Even in a crisis situation, they were dealing with the situation as it seemed as if it were normal circumstances. But investigators, inspectors needed to go as well. And NISA and TEPCO, vis-a-vis the fellow or whomever else, needs to find a way to relay what's going on at TEPCO. And the decision-making needed to be relayed in a correct manner. And if this could have been done, this would have been better. After the 15th, being in the same place and having TV conferences on a 24-hour basis, we were able to finally realize it at that point. When the new arrangement is set up, we would like to utilize those lessons learned and implement them. The integrated headquarters and establishment of that, who came up with that idea? It was myself. Well then, as an idea, you feel that you should have raised this earlier than when you did? As far as this matter is concerned, I was able to speak about this, and that's because there was that issue of possible withdrawal. Generally speaking, the government to a private company saying you must do this or that, normally that would not happen. However, if you look at the law that existed, there was that authority on the part of the head of the headquarters to give the necessary instructions. But just because it's stipulated in the law whether this authority ought to be exercised or not, that's something that I was not thinking about from the early stages. But when this withdrawal issue was raised as a possibility, I felt that we needed to integrate the government and TEPCO's decision-making, or else a terrible situation would ensue. And so there was this proposal that was made by myself to set up the headquarters. As a result of that issue that was raised, that is the reality that we were able to set up the headquarters at that point. I'd like to talk about the same theme. There are some examples of where you gave instructions not based on any laws that had existed. From Mr. Soramoto, there was an advisory team that had functioned. We had heard, and we had also confirmed ourselves. As far as the setting up of this team is concerned, how did you come to become aware of it? I myself also have read the articles that have been recently published in the papers. After the 15th and thereafter was when it was. Basically, when the integrated response headquarters was set up at a very early stage on the 15th. There were all kinds of recommendations and discussions that we wanted to have the headquarters receive, including what was recommended from abroad. So regarding Mr. Soramoto, generally speaking, I did say I wanted him to cooperate with us. As far as this integrated response headquarters setting up some other body, it's not that I gave him instructions to do that. If they themselves felt that such a thing was necessary, whether it would be under the umbrella of the integrated headquarters or outside of it, that was another matter. When Mr. Soramoto told you, the Prime Minister, he was going to set up this sort of team, the idea came out from their side. But was it Mr. Soramoto himself who came up with this idea? Until I read those articles, the advisory team was not something I knew the existence of. Generally, I said to Mr. Soramoto, you are quite knowledgeable about all of this, so please cooperate. I never gave instructions to set up such and such a team. As I had mentioned earlier, after the 15th, the integrated headquarters became the central focus, and the advisory team, including Mr. Hosono and others, would have received recommendations and advice from them. So therefore, the integrated headquarters as a body to cooperate voluntarily with them, that was why the team was set up, it seems. As a central member of the team, Mr. Kondo, who is also the head of the NAIIC, according to him, from the very early stages, the Unit 1 explosion, after it had happened, including how to deal with the situation technically, there were various kinds of advice that was given to the Prime Minister. This is a personal opinion that was mentioned by him, but did you hear about these personal recommendations and advice? Did it reach your ears? No, not specifically. When I recollect the situation, there is the Nuclear Safety Commission, NSC, that exists, and vis-a-vis the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, it provides recommendations. And the NSC, when there is a disaster at a nuclear power station, the legal positioning is not something that was explained, especially. It's a very important body, and there are a lot of experts who are quite knowledgeable, and to provide their advice to the NSC, that's what they do. Not personally, but as an organization, to have them do their activities, at the very least, as far as I'm concerned. When I think about the relationship between the two, that needed to be well thought out. Mr. Hosono, after the 15th, including the worst-case scenario, had asked for advice of various kinds. That's how I understand it. However, it was a personal thing, a personal opinion that was expressed. In Japan, as far as the nuclear experts are concerned, they were there in the NAIIC as well. And this time, in the accident that had taken place, various people's opinions needed to be listened to. I do believe you said that. And so you did not receive advice from the experts there either? As I had mentioned earlier, The worst case scenario, shall we say, that issue, including myself and including Mr. Hosono, we asked Dr. Kondo to please consider this, and we received some very valuable, important advice. I believe that was after the 22nd. On the 22nd, you provided your instructions and you said, to what extent can you provide this? And this was provided on the 25th. And Mr. Kondo, of course, did his activities, but after the accident took place, he was there on hand, and various kinds of information had been provided and advice had been provided. And you were not aware that all of that was taking place? Where he was and what sort of activities he was engaging in. For example, in the Prime Minister's office, they had their engagements with the NSC. If there was a report that was given via that route, I would have recollected, but that was not the case. And Mr. Hosono, when he became in charge of, and when I appointed him as the head of this nuclear disaster matter, at the very least, from that point in time, we were able to take a very clear position. As a system, from the people in the cabinet office, there was no proposal that was made. It is this kind of accident that had taken place, and it's a very severe situation. When we think about the nuclear accident law that had existed, it was not utilized or applied this time. I'm sure that you felt that this was problematic, and you received second opinions from your friends, and you had special advisors to the cabinet and other people that you consulted with. And I did not know the name of the team you said, but the advisory team also, if they were experts, were to provide expert advice. So under the law, when you thought about the response that did not go well, the overall experts' opinions could have been taken into account more so. Maybe there was a grand design you had to make that the reality. Did you have such a grand design? At the very least, on the 15th, the integrated response headquarters was set up. There might be a new accident that might happen. There might be possibly another hydrogen explosion that might occur. To think up a grand design, honestly speaking, I did not have the wherewithal at that time to do that. Once the matters are becoming more under control, then Nuclear Regulatory Commission and such matters could be further considered. At that time, I did not have the luxury of considering such grand design. From the United States side, there was an indication that there would be support at a very early stage. When you communicated with the president via the hotline, you did receive from the president this message that he will support you in every way. That's correct. And regarding the support from the United States, what sort of support were you hoping to receive from the United States? On the day of the accident, the earthquake and the tsunami happened, and then the accident happened. USS Ronald Reagan came in the evening to off the coast of Fukushima, and Sendai Airport response was going to be undertaken, and various types of supplies and material were to be provided. And I felt very grateful for this support and assistance of the United States. And of course, we are allies in the United States and Japan. And to receive such support and assistance, I was most grateful. And I thought that it was a good thing. And so as far as what would be necessary to make these requests, and if there were any offers from the United States side, I wanted to receive them, generally speaking. And the Ministry of Defense has a very deep relationship with the United States military. So there were consultations that were held military to military between our two countries from a very early stage. Well, right now you were talking about the tsunami and what happened after that in terms of the support that would be extended. What sort of cooperation were you thinking of implementing with the United States in terms of the nuclear power station accident? At a very early stage, experts from the United States had arrived, and I had heard this generally. So with those experts, the concerned parties in Japan, how they would build that relationship of trust and cooperation with one another was something that I was looking into. And the relationship with the United States for Japan is a relationship of friendship. It's a strong alliance. And so the Fukushima nuclear power station was, of course, built with GE technology. So it was very important to incorporate the advice and the knowledge of those American experts. So as far as that posture was concerned, we did make clear that we had that posture of wishing to receive that support from them.
I think there was some idea proposed by the U.S. to have their engineers stationed at the Prime Minister's office. I think I asked the same question to Mr. Edano. Did you confirm the fact? Were you aware of that offer? Well, to me, there is no really report made to me from the Chief Cabinet Secretary. There was a statement by Edano. There's something to do with the sovereignty of nation. Was that the statement made by my Chief's Cabinet Secretary? Yes, I was listening to on internet, and Mr. Edano said that way. So that's how I understood. So there was an offer by the United States at a very critical situation. So the Chief Cabinet Secretary, on his own, without consulting with you, declined the offer because that was related to the sovereignty of the nation issue. I think remember Mr. Nomura was there in yesterday's commission meeting. Mr. Edano, the then Chief Cabinet Secretary, said was not really declining the cooperative idea or cooperation from the United States. I think what he said, and I share the same idea. I gave the clear instruction to have the good cooperations with the United States. But what he said was the building the Prime Minister's official residence, and to have someone from the United States of a certain position stationed in the Prime Minister office was not something that could be accommodated based upon Mr. Edano's judgment. I would have the same decision. So there was a proposal. That was Mr. Edano, Chief Cabinet Secretary, who declined their offer of having engineer U.S. experts at the official residence of Prime Minister. I think that's what he said than what he believed, because I wasn't reported about that. I think there were actually need to enhance the cooperations in other forms, not in the Prime Minister's office as such. But was there any instruction by the Prime Minister to ask for U.S. cooperation or the expertise of the U.S. to reflect those findings at the handling of the nuclear power accident? Was there any such fact?